Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be another division preview, and as you can see on screen, it's going to be for the AFC East today. So what I do in these videos is I go over each roster in the NFL and give individual grades to each position group as well as each part of the coaching staff, and then finally give my record prediction for that team's season. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into our fourth place team today, which is going to be the New York Jets. Obviously last season for the Jets was not exactly ideal. They finished 2-14, which on its own is very bad, but what makes it even worse is that they didn't even get the first pick, as through winning those last two games, they did end up with a better record than the Jaguars, and therefore got the second pick and missed out on Trevor Lawrence. However, that's not to say I don't have any optimism about this team, as I do think that they had a really good offseason. A main reason for that would be their acquisition of new head coach Robert Saleh, former defensive coordinator on the 49ers. I'll talk about him a little bit more later as a defensive coordinator, but overall I do just want to say that I think he's going to be able to bring a really nice culture shift to this team, and I think that he's going to be able to bring a cohesive unit together for this team and improve them from the depths of darkness that they have been in for the past decade or so. But more specifically, looking at the people that they acquired this offseason, in free agency, they brought in Corey Davis, who just had a huge season for the Titans at receiver, also Carl Lawson, one of the better edge rushers in the league when healthy, as well as solid starters on defense like Sheldon Rankins and LaMarcus Joyner. I also really liked what they did in the draft, as they obviously drafted Zach Wilson, but also later in the draft got Elijah Vera-Tucker with their second pick in the first round, and Elijah Moore with their second round pick. I also don't really think they lost too many key players. They lost Brian Poole, who's a nice solid starting corner, but beyond that, they lost Bradley McDougald, who had a really tough season for them last year, and then also Sam Darnold, who, I'll just say never quite lived up to expectations here, to put it lightly. So with their offseason out of the way, let's go ahead and just jump into their offense. First, talking about their offensive coaching and scheme. New offensive coordinator, and here's Mike LaFleur from San Francisco, brother of Matt LaFleur, and he's going to be implementing that same Shanahan scheme, outside zone, play action, deep shots type offense. Lots of running the ball outside, quick running backs, really athletic tackles. That traditional offense that's being run all over the league this year. So while Mike LaFleur has no play calling experience, I do think that he's going to be able to implement a nice scheme here, so I'm going to give him a grade of a B there. As for the players, starting at quarterback, I do give him a grade of a C, which is not to say that I don't like Zach Wilson. I want to get that out of the way right away. I actually do quite like Zach Wilson. He was my third graded quarterback in this class. I think he has really nice physical tools. I think he is really accurate as a passer and actually has some of the best ball placement in this class. I just don't think that he's super developed yet in terms of reading defenses and making decisions. So I think that that's going to hold him back in year one, but I have no question that he's going to be very successful in the future. Another gripe I have with this room would just be that they don't really have a true backup, no true veteran to step in and play at the beginning of the season to allow Zach Wilson to learn. The only guy they have behind him is James Morgan, who has never played in the NFL to this point and was just a rookie last season, so that's not exactly ideal. At running back, I think that this group is solid. They have Tevin Coleman from the Niners last season. He's a nice speed back. Michael Carter's a nice contact balance, more type of power back that they drafted from NC State. I like him. Other than their backups here are LaMichael Pirine, more that power back. Other than Ty Johnson, more that speed back. So they kind of have two of each and a nice balance here. I think that that's a decent enough room. Other than for receivers, I actually do really like this group. They have Corey Davis and Denzel Mims on the outside. Denzel Mims is someone with a ton of potential, just coming off of a nice rookie season. And then Corey Davis obviously had a fantastic season last year. I don't necessarily think that he's your true alpha number one guy, but I think that he's a really good receiver and someone that's going to be able to contribute to this offense quite a bit. In the slot, they have Jamison Crowder. I assume there have been some rumors about him potentially leaving, but I'm just going to stick with him on the Jets for now. He's a nice solid slot. He's explosive. He makes nice plays after the catch. And I'd even say similar things about Elijah Moore. Given his size profile and what he did in college a lot of the time, you'd think he's more of just that simple playmaker type receiver, just going to work on jet sweeps and screens. But I think that he can do that as well as be a really dominant receiver outside. He's not going to get a ton of opportunities to do that here immediately, I don't think, but I think he does play above his size, and I think he has the potential to be this year's Terry McLaurin type receiver, in the sense that he went under the radar a little bit in the draft, but ends up shining in his first season and becoming a really good receiver. After those four, they have some nice backups as well in Braxton Berrios and Keelan Cole. At tight end, I'm not super excited about what they have here. They have Tyler Kroft, Chris Herndon, and Ryan Griffin, all decent blockers who just don't really provide much in the passing game. And then for the offensive line, it's somewhat hit or miss here, but I think that they have a lot of potential, especially on that left side. Mekhi Becton coming off of a great rookie season. He's an athletic freak. And Elijah Vera Tucker, kind of a guard tackle hybrid from USC that they drafted in the first round. He's a freak athlete that also I think is pretty proficient technique-wise. And then at right tackle they have Morgan Moses, who's a good solid veteran right tackle. Other than that, though, at center they have Connor McGovern, who I don't love. And then at right guard it's going to be a competition between Greg Van Roten and Alex Lewis, which is just not really ideal. So that is going to bog down that grade a little bit. But overall, I think that this offense is going to be pretty decent. A lot of it's going to ride on the quarterback, but in my opinion, I think Zach Wilson is going to struggle a little bit in his first year, and that's going to prevent this offense from reaching its full heights. But I think it projects really nicely into the future. Looking at their defense now, and more specifically with the defensive coordinator slash head coach, Robert Saleh. I say defensive coordinator slash head coach because I know that he's going to be in charge of the defense, and it's going to be his scheme implemented. And I think that that's definitely a positive for this team. I think he did a really good job of maximizing talent over in San Francisco, and I think he's a pretty good play caller as well. So I'm going to give him a B+ there for defensive coaching and scheme. Now looking at the players, at edge they have a really good number 1 with Carl Lawson, who I talked about earlier. But outside of that, they really don't have much. They have Vinny Curry, who started in the past, but I don't really think should be starting anymore at this point in his career. I think he's much better suited to be a depth piece. And then Kyle Phillips and Jabari Zuniga are also just depth pieces as well. So I really don't think that beyond Carl Lawson they have another player that's starting caliber. However, on the inside, I do think that they make up for this quite a bit, as they have Quinnen Williams there, broke out in a big way last year after he was the 3rd pick, I believe, in the 2019 draft. But he really broke out last year and solidified himself as one of the better interior defensive pass rushers in the league. They also brought in Sheldon Rankins, who I talked about, just a good, solid defensive tackle to have on your roster. And then they have Lorenzo Fatukasi here as well, one of the better nose tackles in the league. Obviously a great run defender, but then also can rush the passer more than you'd expect your average nose tackle to be able to. And then they also have John Franklin Myers in here as well, who's a solid depth piece. As for the linebackers, this is probably one of the biggest question marks on this team. They obviously have CJ Mosley there, very good linebacker when he plays. It's just a matter of if he can stay healthy. He has not really been able to do that up until this point in New York. And then outside of him, you really don't have much. Blake Cashman's there. He hasn't really played much in the NFL at all up to this point. And then Gerard Davis is there as well. Former first-round pick for the Detroit Lions. Never really panned out there. Really only provides any value as a run defender. And even there, he's not even great. So not a huge fan of this linebacker room. However, if CJ Mosley can return to who he was on the Ravens, I definitely do think that this could be a decent enough group. We'll also have to see on Blake Cashman, but just a big question mark for now at least. As for the corners, I think that this is definitely a glaring need for them. On the outside, they have Bryce Hall and Bless One Austin. Bryce Hall, a player that I think is smart, is a good tackler, just is not athletic whatsoever, and I think that that's going to hold him back from ever being better than he is right now. And then on the other side, they have Bless One Austin, who in many ways is just the complete opposite of Bryce Hall. Austin is actually a pretty good athlete, but he just does not have very good route recognition, and he has very poor instincts and coverage overall. And then on the inside, there's kind of 3 guys competing for that. You have Corey Ballantyne, who's also going to rotate to the outside. Then you have Javelin Guidry and LaMarcus Joyner. Obviously, if they want to use him as a nickel corner and not a free safety, I think LaMarcus Joyner is going to win this job. I just do question in what role the coaching staff is going to use him. But if you're leaving it up to Ballantyne and Guidry, I think that they're both going to get a fair amount of snaps, and you're not really too excited about that. And then on to the safeties. This is a group that I think is quite good. Marcus Mays is a really versatile safety, can play in the box, can play over the top, can play in man coverage. He's just a really good overall safety, probably a top 10 safety in the league last season. And then Ashton Davis, their 2nd or 3rd round pick from 2020. And he's also quite good. He's a nice box safety who has some solid coverage skills as well. And then LaMarcus Joyner, as I touched on earlier, could be playing nickel corner, or he could be playing free safety, where I think he can be pretty decent over the top. So with all that being said, I think that I'm going to give this defense a C. It's really tough to get past that really lackluster corner group, as well as a question on linebacker and some subpar edge rushers. However, I do think that this group has the potential to be pretty solid. If Saleh can really maximize these guys, get some breakout stars potentially, I think this could be a better group. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and just look at their record, which I think is going to be 6-11 obviously going to land in last place in the division, which takes us to our third place team, which I think is going to be the Miami Dolphins. Last season, the Dolphins were definitely one of the most surprising teams in the league. They finished 10-6 after finishing 5-11 in 2019, and I, in fact, even think that they got better this offseason. In free agency, they brought in Will Fuller from the Texans, who's a really good deep threat and could provide some much-needed speed to this offense. They also signed Justin Coleman, who's a good slot corner, and they traded for Benardrick McKinney, who's a nice big body over the middle that can play the Dante Hightower role in this defense. I also think that they had a fantastic draft. In the first round, they got Jalen Waddle and Jalen Phillips, my receiver 3 and my edge 1. I think that they're both fantastic players and are going to be able to start immediately. And even in the second round, they got 2 players that I think can start immediately in Liam Eichenberg and Javon Holland. So that's a pretty outstanding draft to get 4 starters like that. As for the losses, they did lose a fair amount of starters. They lost Kyle Van Noy, Shaq Lawson, Bobby McCain on the defense, all 3 starting players that played pretty well last year. And then on offense, they lost 2 starting offensive linemen with Ted Karras and Eric Flowers, and also lost their best quarterback on the roster last year in Ryan Fitzpatrick. With that being said, let's go ahead and look at their offense. And firstly, just talk about their coaching and scheme. This offseason, the Dolphins brought in co-offensive coordinators in Eric Stoodsville and George Godsey. That was the first time I'd ever heard of anything like that happening. And both of those guys were on the Dolphins staff prior to this, so I'm not really too excited given how much of a mess the offensive coaching staff was for the Dolphins last season. However, I'm not going to be too harsh on them, and I am going to give them a fighting chance, so I'll just give them a C for now. On to the roster now, talking about quarterbacks first. They have Tua Tagovailoa and Jacoby Brissett there. Tua, obviously, I think is fair to say, was very disappointing last season. Did not exactly display that elite accuracy we saw at Alabama in his first year with the Dolphins, and also was far too passive and struggled to get aggressive as games went on. I will say I do think he has a well above pre-snap processor, especially for someone his age, and I think his accuracy is still above where most rookie quarterbacks were. However, he definitely didn't live up to that 5th overall pick hype, at least for year 1. And even projecting into the future, Tua's never been a guy that has crazy physical traits like a Josh Allen or a Justin Herbert, doesn't have a huge arm and isn't super mobile, so you're really relying on him being way smarter than everyone on the field, being super accurate, and being super efficient up to the level he needed to be in those areas last season. So I'm going to give him a grade of a C- there. As for Jacoby Brissett, he's just a solid backup. Is a pretty decent runner, not a great passer, but can win you some games as a backup if need be. At running back, this again is not a very good group. Starting here is going to be probably a split between Myles Gaskin and Malcolm Brown. Gaskin is a really nice receiver out of the backfield, but doesn't really do much for you as a runner. And Malcolm Brown is just a solid power back, can get you a couple yards up the middle, but it's not going to kick it outside, getting you home runs, and he's not a very good receiver either. Beyond those two, they have Salvon Ahmed, who's a nice home run threat, but can't do much beyond that. Other than Jared Dokes, who they drafted in the 7th round, is similar to Malcolm Brown, very big body, and can get you some yards up the middle, but nothing too much beyond that. At receiver, I do actually really like this group that they have here. On the outside, they're going to have Devontae Parker and Will Fuller. Fuller obviously being the one who's going to bring the deep speed, while Parker's more of the jump ball guy. I think that they contrast really well, and I think that they're both really good at what they do. So that's a nice outside duo there. They also have Preston Williams, who's going to rotate in there, similar to Devontae Parker. Good jump ball receiver, very athletic. Just hasn't really put it together just yet in his 2 seasons. And then in the slot, they drafted Jalen Waddle. Very good deep threat, also really good after the catch and can work in the short game really well with his elite agility. I have high expectations for him in this offense. I think that he fits really well with Tua, and they obviously already have chemistry from working together at Alabama. And then beyond that, they have Albert Wilson and Lynn Bowden. Wilson being a nice solid slot receiver that has some explosiveness. We haven't seen him play in a year, but I think he probably makes the roster here. And then Lynn Bowden is a converted quarterback from Kentucky, really athletic guy, has very little experience as a receiver, but looked pretty good in his limited time last season. At tight end, I also like what they have here with Mike Gesicki. I think he's a really nice receiving threat. He even played a lot of receiver last year, mostly due to his ineptitude in blocking. But he's a really speedy guy, really good on jump balls, and a really good separator. He has the potential to be one of the best receiving threats in the league at tight end. Had a really nice season last year. And then after him, they have Durham Smythe and Adam Shaheen. Also Hunter Long, who they drafted in the 3rd round. All guys that are just more balanced, traditional tight ends. Pretty good blockers, pretty good hands, but not too much in the way of athleticism. And then for the offensive line, this will probably be considered by many people one of the holes in the team, and I somewhat agree. At tackle, they have a young duo of Austin Jackson and Liam Eichenberg. Eichenberg was drafted in the 2nd round this year. Very pro-ready tackle, but not too much in the way of potential. Austin Jackson was the complete opposite coming out of USC last year. Super athletic, but super raw. Struggled quite a bit last year, but I think that he can definitely improve and become a good tackle in the future. We'll see how he develops this season. At guard, I think they're probably going to have a duo of Solomon Kinley and Robert Hunt. Robert Hunt played tackle for the Dolphins last season, but was kicked inside probably for the better this season. Did have pretty stiff feet, but has crazy power in the run game and has pretty good hand placement as well. I actually think he could be potentially a breakout candidate for them at guard this season. Then at left guard, Solomon Kinley, rookie last season, played decently well enough, I guess. They also have DJ Fluker, who's going to potentially rotate in if someone gets hurt there. And then at center, they have Matt Skura. Really struggled for the Ravens last season, but was good in 2019. We'll see if he can return to form this season. But for now, I'm just going to go off what we saw last season, which was not great. So based on those descriptions, obviously it doesn't sound too great for the offensive line. However, I do put less weight into the offensive line, at least for pass protection in this offense, given the goal with a quarterback like Tua and the receivers that they have here of getting the ball out quickly, working in the short game, getting yards after the catch, being efficient, and not requiring too much time from the offensive line in pass protection. So with all that being said, I think that this offense has a lot of variance potentially. It depends a lot on what Tua does this season. It depends a lot on what those coordinators do. And then there's also a ton of young players on this offense outside of Tua that could potentially make or break this offense. But for now, I'm just going to go with a grade of a C there, which takes us to the defense. Of course, led by Brian Flores here. Last year really solidified himself as one of the better defensive coaches in the league. Did a really good job of maximizing the little talent that they had here, and really got these guys to play as a cohesive unit, so I'm going to give them a grade of an A there. As for the roster, first looking at edge, they have a starting duo of Emmanuel Ogbah and Jalen Phillips, with Andrew Van Ginkel rotating in at times, and Vince Beagle as a nice depth piece. Ogbah was very productive last season, in fact one of the most productive edge rushers in the league last season. I don't exactly expect that to repeat this season. A lot of that was very scheme created. However, I do think that he's a solid piece. And then Jalen Phillips on the other side is, in my opinion, the best edge rusher in last year's class, and I think that he has the potential to be a true alpha edge rusher in the future. And then as for the interior, again, I do like this group. They have Christian Wilkins and Raekwon Davis, both young players that are great in run defense and just okay at pass rushing. And then beyond them, they have Adam Butler and Zach Sealer, as they're much better as pass rushers than they are run defenders. So I think that they have a nice versatile group there, with four bodies that can step in and play at a starting level. On to the linebackers now, where they have Jerome Baker and Benardrick McKinney as their two starters. Baker got a big extension this offseason, which I didn't really love. I thought that he was kind of overpaid. However, I do like him as a player. I think he's really smart. I think he's always in the right place at the right time. It's just he's not a very good run defender with that lackluster size. And with someone at that size, you probably expect him to be a really great coverage player. However, I think that his zone instincts are not anything special, and he mostly provides value in man coverage and through being a sideline-to-sideline good tackler. As for Benardrick McKinney, he's in many ways the opposite. He's a huge body that's going to plug up the middle, hopefully be a really good run defender for them, but doesn't do much in the way of coverage. And then the same deal with Landon Roberts. Just a little bit smaller and more mobile, but also just doesn't do anything for you in coverage, and is a pretty good run defender. Now on to the cornerbacks. This was definitely the strength of this team last year, with that duo of Xavier Howard and Byron Jones. However, in my opinion, that duo is definitely in jeopardy here, as I think Howard is going to probably not be on the team next season in light of his contract negotiation. In my personal opinion, I just don't really think that Flores and Greer are going to want to create a precedent of renegotiating contracts right after they're signed and paying guys big money like that. So even if Howard may be worth it, as he's probably a top 3 corner in the league, I just think that the Dolphins are not going to be the team that pays him, and that he's going to end up getting traded somewhere. However, that may not be the end of the world for this team, to be honest. They have Byron Jones on the other side, who's in his own right a very good corner, top 15 to 20 in the league most likely. And then Noah Igbenogany, their first-round pick last year, who, though in his limited playtime last season, did struggle quite a bit. He has really good potential, and maybe with a full offseason of work, he could become a starting caliber outside corner. As for the slot guys, they have Nick Needham there, Justin Coleman, Jason McCourty. It's really going to be a three-way competition there. I think that Justin Coleman's probably going to win it. He's had lots of experience as a slot corner in the past, and he's been quite good at it. But even if they are just depth, Needham and McCourty are both really nice pieces to have. And then for the safeties, it's going to be a starting duo of Javon Holland and Eric Rowe. Holland is a really explosive center fielding type player that's going to be able to produce a lot of interceptions. And Eric Rowe is just a nice versatile piece that's going to be able to play in the box at times. Also man up tight ends and play over the top pretty well. So I definitely like that duo. And then they also have Brandon Jones in there, who's a nice box safety. Similar to Eric Rowe, is also pretty versatile. So in total, I think that pretty much every position group they have here is pretty solid. And they also have great coaching, so I'm going to give them a grade of a B overall here for the defense, which takes us to their final record for the season, in my opinion, which is going to be around 9-8, and going to place them third in the AFC East. Moving on now to our second place team, which is going to be the New England Patriots. So last season for the Patriots was in many ways definitely a fall from grace. They finished 7-9 and did not make the playoffs, obviously, and that's a very large contrast from what they had been doing the last 2 decades with Tom Brady. However, I do think that they did bring in a ton of great players this offseason, so I have no doubt that they're going to be able to at least compete for a playoff spot this season. So just going over some of those acquisitions right now. They signed Matt Judon from the Ravens, a nice edge rusher. They got Trent Brown back in a trade from the Raiders. They signed Kyle Van Noy back from the Dolphins. They also got Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith as a really nice tight end duo. And then they also brought in Henry Anderson on the interior defensive line. And finally, somewhat addressed that receiver room by grabbing Nelson Aguilar. And then in the draft, they also brought in some players that could definitely make an impact immediately, with Christian Barmore, my DT1 in last year's class, and Mac Jones, who I'll get into later. In addition to gaining all these really good players, they also didn't really lose all that many players. The main one would probably be Joe Thuney, who they lost to the Chiefs, an all-pro caliber guard who's been a Patriot for a little while. They also lost Marcus Cannon at tackle, and Patrick Chung retired, and Jason McCourty obviously just left to the Dolphins. But beyond Joe Thuney, I really would not be too upset about losing any of those guys if I were the Patriots. So let's go ahead and just jump into the offense here. And firstly, talking about the offensive coordinator here, Josh McDaniels. And I don't really feel like I need to even get into this all that much. McDaniels has been here for years. It's always pretty much been the same. Last season, he implemented much more of that read option with Cam Newton. But this offense is still going to be centered around working in the short game. Obviously, with Cam, there's going to be more quarterback design runs. But I don't really think there's going to be anything too new this season. Looking at the players, though, at quarterback, obviously they have Cam Newton, Mac Jones, Jared Stidham in there as well. And first I'll talk about Cam. So the grades you see on screen are for Cam Newton because I think that he's going to be starting at least the first week of the season and probably most of the season. But I think that he is at this point pretty underrated as a passer, especially. His complete inability to throw the ball downfield has been a much publicized part of his game recently. And it is a fair criticism, but I still do think that he brings value as he is accurate in the short game. He makes quick decisions. He's obviously a really good runner. And he also has a really good pre-snap and post-snap processor, and is a good decision maker. So I think Cam Newton is still a pretty solid quarterback, and still a quarterback that's capable of winning a lot of games for the Patriots. However, if he is to get benched or hurt or whatever, you have Mac Jones in there, who I think a lot of the stuff I said about Tua can be applied to Mac Jones. Mac Jones has a little bit of a bigger arm. He's a little bit less mobile, and he's not quite the improviser that Tua is. He's not quite as good as moving around in the pocket and escaping pressure. But he is an accurate quarterback. He has a good pre-snap processor, and overall he's just good at reading defense, very far ahead of most guys his age. Then accuracy-wise, downfield he was historic last season, so that's definitely something he has on Tua. But I think that if you like Tua coming out last season, even if you don't like him now, if you liked him coming out last season, most of what you liked on him should probably be directly applied to Mac Jones. I know that he's fat and stuff, but he's still a pretty good prospect in my opinion. And then at running back, you have a pretty standard Patriots running back room here. Damian Harris, we saw kind of break out last season. He has some nice power, some nice speed. Is pretty good at reading blocks. He's just overall a good runner. Doesn't do much in the passing game, but he's not bad there either. You also have James White there. Very similar to Myles Gaskin, who I talked about earlier, but just better in every way, pretty much. Really good receiver out of the backfield. Very smart. Has a knack for the ball. But he's just pretty much an average runner at this point. They also have Sony Michel, who's going to get a fair amount of snaps. Pretty solid power back. Definitely not worth the first-round pick they spent on him, but he's certainly not a bad runner. So that's a pretty decent running back room. At receiver, still not a huge fan of what they have here, even if they did improve on what they had last season. They brought in Nelson Aguilar, like I said, who, though he definitely improved from his terrible days in Philadelphia, was still not a great receiver, had some drop issues, still had pretty significant drop issues, but is a pretty good route runner, can go up and get balls pretty well, pretty decent after the catch. He's not a bad receiver, just definitely not who you want to be your number one. They also, on the other side, have Kendrick Bourne, similar type of player, probably not the same caliber separator that Aguilar is, but has better hands, I think, than Jacoby Myers in the slot. Pretty average slot receiver, has a little bit of explosiveness, pretty decent after the catch, but not going to do anything too far beyond what you'd expect from your average slot receiver. And then they also have N'Keal Harry, former first-round pick in here. I think requested a trade at some point, so maybe he won't be on the team next year. Whatever happens with him, I don't think it's going to have too much of an effect on this team, because he's provided absolutely no value to this team in his time here. So with those guys as your main receivers, probably not too happy with that. I'm going to give him rid of a C- there. However, I think the tight ends are going to be able to make up for that, definitely. Like I said earlier, sign Hunter Henry and sign Jonnu Smith. 2 top 10 or so. And I even like the way that they contrast off of each other, with Jonnu Smith being much more of your athletic, versatile weapon type receiving tight end, while Hunter Henry is much more of the traditional blocking tight end. That's also a really nice receiver, but far less explosive than Smith. But regardless of play style, they're both definitely very good. They also have Devin Asiasi, who they drafted last year. However, I don't really see him getting much playing time, as he struggled quite a bit last year, and also given the 2 guys that are ahead of him in the depth chart. And then moving on to the offensive line, this has been one of the Patriots' strengths for as long as I can remember. So just looking at their tackles to start out, they brought in Trent Brown this offseason. Definitely one of the better tackles in the league. And then Isaiah Wynn on the left side. Probably the worst starting offensive lineman they have. But with that being said, he's still pretty good. And then the inside is just absolutely insane. David Andrews, very good starting center. Shaq Mason, very good starting guard. And then Michael Onwenu played tackle for them pretty well last year. But I think that this move to guard is going to even be very beneficial for him, given the way he profiles much better as a guard. So given their potentially lackluster passing game, but stellar running game, and pretty solid play caller, I'm going to give the Patriots offense a B-. Nothing too explosive, but also certainly above average, which takes us to their defense. Firstly, I'll just quickly touch on the defensive coaching and scheme here. A+. Bill Belichick is in charge here. That's all I'm going to say. Obviously the GOAT defensive coach of all time. Possibly the GOAT coach, period, of all time. But with that being said, let's go ahead and just look at the players here. Starting at edge, they have a duo of Matt Judon and Chase Winovich. Kyle Van Noy, Ronnie Perkins, and Josh Uche are also all going to get some significant snaps. They don't really have any true elite pass rushers here, but Judon is definitely the best of this group. Probably just a really good number 2 type edge rusher. Not really who you want to be your number 1, but certainly not bad. Winovich is a similar type player. Not quite as good as Judon, but just a nice number 2 type edge rusher. And then Ronnie Perkins from Oklahoma, who they drafted. He is a rookie, but I did quite like him coming out of college, so I think he's going to have some impact here. Kyle Van Noy. I say edge lightly, because he also plays quite a bit of linebacker, but he's a nice run defender and just a smart player. And then Josh Uche, who they drafted last year, played pretty well last year. And then on the interior, you have 4 or 5 guys here that are all going to be able to play significant snaps. Lawrence Guy, who has continuously been one of the most underrated defensive linemen in the league the last couple seasons. Henry Anderson, similar deal, honestly, very underrated. Devon Goshaw from the Dolphins, good run defender here. Christian Barmore from Alabama, though maybe a little overrated in the draft because people were expecting him to be that dominant Alabama early first round interior defensive lineman. He still was quite good, just did not have the same athletic profile of say Quinn Williams. And then they also have Dietrich Wisen here, who's a nice depth piece. At linebacker, again, very similar to the other 2 groups that we've talked about so far. Just a ton of bodies that they're going to be able to throw at you. Dante Hightower, super great run defender, also can do a little bit in pass coverage. Juwan Bentley's a good run defender. Kyle Van Noy is a versatile hybrid outside linebacker. Raekwon McMillan's a good run defender. Cam McGrone, someone that I think fell in the draft a little bit last year and has the ability to play Mike in the NFL day 1, is a good run defender and also has good instincts in zone coverage. And then as for the corners, on the outside they're going to have Stephon Gilmore and J.C. Jackson. Jawan Williams and Jalen Mills going to rotate in there as well. Then on the slot, they're going to have Jonathan Jones starting. I don't really think too much needs to be said about that. J.C. Jackson, really good ball hawk, played really well last season. Then Stephon Gilmore, only 1 year off of a Defensive Player of the Year campaign. Even though last year was a bit of a down year for him, he's still one of the better corners in the league. Then Jonathan Jones is a really nice nickel. So that's certainly one of the best corner groups in the league. Other than at safety, they have Devin McCourty, who, though aging, is still one of the better free safeties in the league. I think Kyle Duggar is a super versatile safety they got in the 2nd round last season. Came from a D2 school and just surprised everyone. They also have Adrian Phillips there, who's also a nice versatile piece. Probably going to play mostly in the box, but he's also not bad in coverage. So in my opinion, all this adds up to an A- grade for the defense, which takes us to their record for this season, which I think is going to be 11-6, and it's going to place them 2nd in the division, which takes us to our 1st place team, the Buffalo Bills. So this offseason was definitely not an eventful one for the Bills. Really the only key player that they added was Emmanuel Sanders, and that was mostly for the purpose of just replacing John Brown, who they lost in free agency. They also lost Brian Winters in free agency, but he wasn't even a starter for the entirety of the season, so I don't think they're really killing themselves over that. But even though I would usually say that if in the NFL you're not getting better, you're probably getting worse, I honestly don't really think that the Bills needed to do much this offseason. They had a fantastic year last year. They went 13-3 and almost made it to the Super Bowl. Ran into the Chiefs in the AFC Championship, and that didn't go too well. But I think their strategy of just running it back this season and trying to see if they can improve on last season with the same roster is not even that bad of an idea. So, without further ado, let's just go ahead and look at that roster, starting with the offense. I think that what this coaching staff as a whole was able to do in terms of coaching Josh Allen and other players on this offense, getting that offensive line to be great in pass protection, getting some of those receivers to really step up, and obviously making Josh Allen a top quarterback in the league is absolutely insane. And then also the play calling of Brian Daboll, his willingness to change the game plan from week to week so drastically and for it to work so often, I really like. And I think that the vertical passing game that the Bills were running last year really benefited Josh Allen quite a bit and worked with his strengths quite well. So I just think that Brian Daboll is one of the best offensive coordinators in the league, and I think that the offensive coaching staff overall is also elite, so I'm going to give him a grade of an A there. As for the roster, though, starting with quarterback, obviously they have Josh Allen here, MVP candidate last season, huge arm, super accurate downfield, great improviser, could still use some work in terms of pre-snap processor, and he also made some questionable decisions that I didn't really get punished for last year, thus the grade of an A and not an A+. But I still think that he's going to get better this season. He's improved drastically every year he's been in the league. I see no reason that can't continue, and I just think Josh Allen's absolutely fantastic. Doesn't even really matter who the backups are, but I'll go over it anyway. Mitch Trubisky. Enough said. He's Mitch Trubisky. Other than Jake Fromm they drafted last year, he's going to compete for a backup spot with Mitch, I'm guessing. That's not too bad, those two guys as backups. I think you can do a lot worse than that. Moving on to the running backs, though. They added Matt Breida this offseason, who's a nice home run threat, but I think it's still going to pretty much be the same two guys as last season with Devin Singletary, more of that speedy type back, and then also Zach Moss, who brings more of that power. I think that they have a really nice trio here in terms of different skill sets. It's just none of those three guys are truly very versatile or are even beyond replacement level in my opinion. And then at receiver, this was definitely one of the reasons that the Bills were as good as they were last season. Stephon Diggs emerged as one of the top receivers in the league. He and Josh Allen had a great connection immediately. They brought in Emmanuel Sanders from the Saints this offseason. Really good physical receiver. I honestly probably would rather have John Brown for this offense because John Brown works much better as a deep threat than Sanders. But I still understand Sanders is probably the better overall receiver. I think Cole Beasley, on the field at least, is a very good player. He really emerged as one of the better slot receivers in the league last year. Pretty athletic guy, has really good hands, is elusive. Really good route runner, just a really good overall player. I think Gabriel Davis also had a really nice rookie season. Pretty good route runner, pretty physical player. I like him there as well, especially as a fourth receiver. So I'm going to give him a grade of an A- there. Then for the tight ends, nothing too exciting here. They brought in Jacob Hollister from Seattle this offseason. They also have Dawson Knox in there. Neither of those guys are really going to be too exciting, but they're also not terrible either. Other than for the offensive line, you have a really nice tackle duo with Deion Dawkins and Darrell Williams, who they extended this offseason. Probably one of the best tackle duos in the league. And then on the interior, John Feliciano and Cody Ford at guard is average to above average, I would say. And then Mitch Morse is a solid center. So while I do think that this offensive line is very good in pass protection, they aren't the best run blockers. So overall, I think that that's going to hold back the running game a little bit again. But I don't really know how much it matters when you have a passing game like this. I see no reason why they can't repeat what they did last year, at least on offense. So I'm going to give them a grade of an A-, perhaps even conservatively. And we can just move on to the defense, I think. And in this area of the Bills, I'm less high on them, I would say. I think that starting with the defensive coaching, Sean McDermott did a really good job in the past, and I thought that he was a really good guy to be in charge of your defense. But after last season, where this defense, especially the secondary, did struggle quite a bit, I'm not as sold as I once was. However, I do think that some big injuries did play a role into that. So I'm going to be somewhat safe and just give him a grade of a B there. However, with the potential to be in the A- range if you can run this defense like he did back in 2018 and 2019 again. As for the players, though, starting with the edge rushers, they still have Jerry Hughes here as their main guy. He's getting older, but he's really showing no signs of slowing down. Still a good number 2 type edge rusher. And then they have a rotation of like 4 guys that are all going to be competing for snaps here. And that includes AJ Epineza, their second-round pick last year, Carlos Basham, their second-round pick this year, Gregory Rousseau, their first-round pick this year, and Mario Addison, a solid veteran piece that's been in Buffalo for a couple of years. And so with all of those guys are all much more power centric compared to Jerry Hughes, who is more of a balanced pass rusher. You know, talking about each guy individually, I thought Epenesa was a pretty raw player coming out of college, and he was not fantastic last year. He was a good run defender, but he didn't really do too much as a pass rusher. Carlos Basham, I think, is kind of a low ceiling type of player, but he's going to be able to step in and use his effort and pretty solid technique to make somewhat of an impact in year one. Gregory Rousseau was a super highly sought after edge rusher in this class, thought to be probably the best edge rusher going into the draft. However, I was not a fan of him whatsoever. I thought that he was an extremely overrated athlete. Beyond being tall, I didn't really like his mobility skills, and I thought that his technique was just absolutely miserable, which is okay for a freshman, but it's just that his athleticism was not there to the point that I thought it was worth it to risk it. So while I'm not a huge fan of this group, I think that they have enough bodies that can rotate in and play at a starting caliber level that they're going to be alright here, to say the least. Then on the interior, they have 4 bodies here that are going to be able to play quite a bit. Headlined, of course, by Ed Oliver, their first-round pick from 2 years ago. Has not panned out. Has been absolutely terrible when he's been on the field. Has not been able to defend the run whatsoever, and also is not displaying the pass rush skill set that you expected him to have coming out of college. He's looking like a pretty massive bust up to this point, but of course it's only his 3rd season. I'll give him another chance, but if he doesn't start to show up as a real pass rusher this season, I think you should definitely be pretty concerned as a Bills fan. Then you have Vernon Butler, Harrison Phillips, Darlo Lele, all pretty much nose tackles that provide absolutely nothing in terms of pass rush. So, while I do think that they do help in the run game quite a bit, improve on Ed Oliver, who cannot defend the run whatsoever, they definitely do not help in the passing game. So for that reason, I'm actually pretty low on this group. I'm going to give them a C- with a grade of a D+ for the pass rush. Then for the linebackers, however, I do really love this linebacker group. Matt Milano, super underrated, really smart player, really good coverage instincts, athletic, good in run defense, just really good overall player. Then Tremaine Edmonds, really raw on the mental side of the game, absolutely flies around the field and can make some huge plays in run defense, but does lack in coverage instincts. However, similar to how Devin White is used in the Tampa Bay defense, he can be somewhat hidden by having another really good linebacker in there with Matt Milano, similar to Levante David over there. And then they have AJ Klein to rotate in as well. He's a solid run defender. Pretty traditional 3rd linebacker to have. Not going to complain about that. As for the corners now, I obviously love what they have at number 1 with Trey White, one of the better corners in the league. But beyond that, it is a little bit concerning. You don't really have very much depth on the outside. The only other guy that's really going to compete for snaps there, I think, is going to be Levi Wallace, who really struggled last year. Did come along a little bit at the end of the season, but overall did not have a good season whatsoever last year. Then you have Teron Johnson, who's a pretty average slot corner, maybe slightly above average, still young and can improve, but that's definitely not that exciting. And then they still have Dane Jackson, who's going to rotate in the nickel and do that decently well. And at safety, however, they really have absolutely no depth here. However, the top 2 guys in Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer are 2 of the best in the league. Both really versatile players, both good over the top, good run defenders, good in man coverage. Just both really balanced, versatile safeties. Each are really good safeties on their own, but they only accentuate each other's talents, and they definitely boost this defense up quite a bit. So though I do think that the pass rush is very spotty, I think that they're coached pretty well. I like the linebackers, and I think the secondary is pretty good. So I'm going to give their defense a grade of a B-, which takes us to their record, which I think is going to be 13-4. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.